Hello everyone, this lecture is focusing on the different thought processes and steps that you need to take as you're planning to write a rhetorical analysis. So the first question that we need to consider is, of course, what is a rhetorical analysis? And this really comes down to understanding the assignment, what it is that we're going to be writing about, what it is we're going to be explaining throughout the course of our essay. So if we think about rhetoric is the art or method of communicating effectively, specifically to an audience. So these are the different moves and choices that we make when we're presenting an argument and we're trying to persuade them. So when we're thinking of that, when we're thinking of what that means for rhetorical analysis, when we're writing a rhetorical analysis, then we're really just looking at the different rhetorical choices that an author used as he or she was constructing the argument. So when we're writing a rhetorical analysis, when we're planning for it, we really want to start by breaking down the argument itself and figuring out what are the different elements that we can talk about. So based on the elements of argument we've previously covered, that would come down to the different claims that are presenting the reasoning for that overall argument, the evidence used in order to support the individual points, and of course to persuade and to kind of prove why your claims are correct and why the audience should agree or accept the reasoning behind your argument. And of course, finally, we have the rhetorical strategies, which are the little tools that are used in order to form the language, the organization that work to appeal to the audience, specifically when we think about the Aristotelian appeals. So when we're planning rhetorical analysis, we really want to look at those individual factors, the claims, the evidence, and the strategies, because all of those things work together in order to create the overall argument, that main assertion, and ideally make it persuasive. So once we've identified the different elements of the argument that we are going to be analyzing, we're going to be discussing, it's really important to maintain objectivity as we're presenting them, as we're assessing them, especially considering that when we're writing a rhetorical analysis, part of that is putting yourself into the author's mindset. So really trying to figure out what was he or she trying to do based on the choices that were made. And of course, we also need to put ourselves into the mindset of that intended audience, especially when it comes down to assessing the overall effectiveness for those readers. We really need to think of, okay, what would the audience think about this information? How would they view it? And is it enough to persuade them? And of course, we really want to keep in mind with that being that you may not be a member of the intended audience, so you would have to think about explaining that and thinking about their thought processes separate from your own. So thinking specifically about our essay and our guidelines for writing rhetorical analysis, we really are only focusing on certain aspects of the argument because, of course, when we're writing rhetorical analysis, a rhetorical analysis can be very long, depending on whether or not we're analyzing multiple claims, multiple pieces of evidence, and multiple examples of rhetorical strategies. So the purpose for our assignment is we are identifying the main assertion, the main argument in the article, and then analyzing how one specific claim leads up to that overall idea and whether or not it's effective for the target audience. We're analyzing one specific type of evidence and illustrating and explaining specifically how it works to persuade the audience to believe the specific claim and whether or not it is effective and persuasive evidence for the intended audience. And then we're analyzing 3 different examples of rhetorical strategies, and that specifically means one strategy per Aristotelian appeal. So one strategy that appeals to pathos, one strategy that appeals to ethos, and one strategy that appeals to logos. Essentially, by just focusing on these individual examples, we are just giving a brief representation of the main choices that the author is making instead of focusing on everything, which would be a much larger essay. So the next thing that you really want to focus on as you're planning for writing the rhetorical analysis, and of course planning for your outline that is due this week is figuring out what concrete examples you want to use from the text. Because, of course, with our analysis of the author's rhetorical choices, it's really important to show how the argument was constructed instead of just summarizing or paraphrasing what the author was presenting. And the easiest way to show and not just tell is by using concrete textual examples. So these would be specific quotes that are illustrating how the author is presenting the claim, how the author presents that evidence, and then how the author is presenting the different rhetorical strategies. So when we're identifying those concrete textual examples, you do want to keep in mind how much you're going to be analyzing. So of course, you don't want to overquote. We really want to keep it to the point and just illustrate what the author is doing. So as a general rule, for each body paragraph, for each element of the argument that we're going to talk about for our paper, you want to focus on just presenting one quote that's illustrating how the author is using that element. And then, of course, as you're planning what you're going to talk about, you really want to break down and brainstorm what was the author intending to do or trying to do by using that specific language, wording, claim, evidence, etc. And then you want to brainstorm like who that audience is and how may they interpret it in terms of it being persuasive for them. So as you're planning out your rhetorical analysis, as you're outlining what you're going to be analyzing, you do want to note those different things to make sure that you're analyzing the specific example fully. The final thing you want to consider as you're planning your rhetorical analysis is to be strategic. So when you're choosing examples of the claims, evidence, rhetorical strategies, you want to be confident in your explanation and your analysis of them. So I do recommend choosing examples that you have something to say about, that you feel like you can analyze fully or you understand fully, because that's going to make the whole writing process much easier for you. You want to focus on your organization as well and make sure that you're responding to all aspects of the prompt to make sure that you are addressing one claim, one piece of evidence, and then 3 rhetorical strategies. So 1 for each of the Aristotelian appeals. And then, of course, keeping in mind as you're writing to avoid summary and, of course, to focus on analysis. And, of course, when we're thinking about your analysis, it should be 3 to 4 times the length of the quote as a minimum. And, of course, one of the lecture videos later this week does cover how we can integrate those textual examples effectively. So keep that in mind as you begin drafting your rhetorical analysis.